Hi everyone, and in today's video we're going to take an in-depth look at the RAcast. Hi everyone, and in today's video for PSO Blueburst we're going to take an in-depth look at the RAcast. This is the next in the series of the character class guides that I've been doing on the channel. So if your favourite class hasn't been listed yet, we will be getting around to it. We are going to cover all of them, but quite a lot of them have already been done, so check the channel if you haven't already. So today we're going to be focusing on the RAcast. So what we'll do first is we'll go through what the name means, we'll go through the strengths and weaknesses of the class, the stat breakdowns, as well as some recommended gear that you could look for. And we'll also demonstrate a boss fight as well, just so you can get an idea of how the class plays. So first thing we'll look at is the name. So like every other video, we always break down the name of the class just so you know what it means, because PSO uses this very strange naming system to denote each class. Now, the way it works is the first part of the name denotes what class archetype you are, so whether you're Hunter, Ranger, or Force. And the last part of the name in lowercase refers to what gender and race you are. So for RAcast, so RA means Ranger, so you're going to primarily be using range weapons. And cast is the suffix that the game uses for male casts, so male androids. So a RAcast is a male android ranger. So it's quite a simple one. So the next thing we'll look at is the stat breakdowns for RAcast. So level 1, you won't be able to see it on here because of where my camera is, but basically at level 1, if we compare it to the other rangers, so for our HP, we start at 33, which is the highest of all of the rangers by a little bit. We're slightly ahead of Raker. We don't have any TP, obviously, because we're an android, we don't use TP. Our attack power starts at 30, which again is the highest of all the rangers by quite a bit. Our defense starts at 18, which is roughly average. We have no mental strength, again, because we're an android, we don't use techs or anything. Our ATA, so our accuracy, starts at 75, which is pretty much average. It's the second lowest, but it's not very far behind the second lowest. So sorry, not very far behind the second highest. So we're at 75, as opposed to Raker, which is just ahead at 77, and Rare Marl is just behind at 72. And then our evade is 31, which is the joint lowest of any class in the game. It's tied with Raker. That's level 1. If we then go to level 200, so this is level 200 with base stats, with no materials, no mag, etc. Just your base level 200 stats. Our HP will go to 1,964, which is actually the highest of any class in the game. This actually even beats out all of the Hunter classes. So for some reason, and I don't know why this is, RAcast has the most health of any class in the entire game, even though it's a range class. Again, we've got no TP. Our attack power goes to 859, which is the highest of all the rangers. And by quite a bit, the next nearest is Remar at 806. Our defense goes to 505, which is about middle of the road. Actually, it's on the upper end, actually. So we are quite a bit behind Raker, but we're significantly ahead of Remar and Remar. We ignore mental strength. Our ATA goes to 199, which is the lowest of all the rangers. So we're just behind Raker at 208, but then the two human rangers are far, far ahead. And then for our evade, we go to 626, which is the lowest of all the rangers. But crucially, it's not the lowest of any class in the game by level 200, so it does scale reasonably okay. It's still not very high, but at least it's not the lowest in the game anymore. If we then take in maximum stats, so this is with a full material plan, etc. Our HP goes to 2,214, which again is the highest of any class in the game. The next nearest being Raker at 2,140, and then Hugh Cast at 2,012. So we are very, very tanky. We're built like one as well. No TP. Attack power goes to 1,350, which is not only the highest of the rangers, but it actually beats out Hugh Newell as well. So we are actually at 1,350. We're actually ahead of Hugh Newell, and we're actually also ahead of Hugh Casil as well. So we actually have a lot of attack power. Our defense goes to 606, which is roughly average for a ranger. We ignore mental strength. Our accuracy goes to 224, which again is the lowest of the ranges. It does make up a little bit, so we're not too far behind the others. The next is RAcast at 231, and then the 2 human rangers are above 240. And our evade goes to 699, which again is the lowest of all the rangers, but not the lowest of anything in the game. So what you can see when you look at the RAcast stats overall is that we are very heavily focused towards health and attack power, which is actually very similar to HuCast. So we do share some similarities with HuCast in that regard. So we are primarily focused around having a lot of health and a lot of attack power. But then we have drawbacks in that we have the least accuracy of the rangers. It's still a lot of accuracy because we are still a ranger, but it is noticeably lower than some of the others. We also have next to no evade. I mean, again, there are classes with lower evade than RAcast, but RAcast is definitely on the lower end. So you're probably not going to be blocking many attacks. Now, realistically, that shouldn't be too much of an issue because with a ranger, you're generally less likely to get hit anywhere because you're attacking from range. And a lot of the ranged attacks in PSO are actually technique attacks, which don't go in your evade anywhere. So it's not too big a deal. As usual, just to reiterate this, we always ignore luck on these videos because luck is a stat that it doesn't increase by level. So luck only increases by using different bits of gear that boost it or by using luck materials. And if you don't know what luck does, luck just affects your chance of critical hits with melee and range attacks. So the higher your luck is, the more chance you'll crit. But we don't really look into it in these videos just because it doesn't increase by level. So that's a rough breakdown of the actual stat layout for RAcast, so you can see we're heavily built towards that health and attack. Now, next thing we need to look at is advantages of playing a RAcast. So the first one is, obviously, we're an android. That itself comes with certain advantages. So first thing is, we have access to traps. So obviously, because we're an android, we're able to use traps. Now, traps are absolutely fantastic crowd control. As I've shown previously, so there are 3 different types of traps in the game. There are damage traps, freeze traps, and confuse traps. So damage traps, just when you detonate, deal damage to every enemy nearby. Freeze traps will freeze all enemies nearby. It's guaranteed freeze, providing the enemy can be frozen. And confuse traps confuse all the enemies that are affected by it, and they will make the enemies start attacking each other. So all the traps have their own uses. There are certain situations where certain traps are better than others. Some enemies you're going to want them to attack each other. Some enemies you just want to freeze and just lock down. So any android is fantastic for this. So traps are always a massive, massive bonus, particularly for areas like challenge mode as well. Androids are absolutely fantastic in challenge mode. Next benefit of an android is we have native HP regeneration. So if we take damage and then stand still, our HP will regenerate. If I stand still now, you can see at the top of the screen that my HP is starting to regen. Now, the regen speed, it depends on your level. It speeds up the higher level you get, but obviously the more health you've got as well, so you're still going to take a while to regen. It's not something you'll typically rely on, but say, for example, you get to a boss fight and then someone has to go AFK for a couple of minutes. It's a handy little thing to have, waiting to stand still, regen some health while they're away. It just helps you save a little bit on monomates and dimates, trimates as well. But generally, it's not something you're going to really rely on. It's just a nice little bonus. Next benefit of androids is you have immunity to certain statuses. So you are immune to poison and you're also immune to paralysis. So that in itself is really, really useful, particularly for dealing with annoying enemies like poison lilies in caves. And again, particularly for areas like challenge mode. So, if you're in caves in challenge mode, you don't need to worry about lilies at all with an android because you can't be poisoned and you can't be paralyzed. We also get boosts to certain status effects. So we get a boost to freeze, confuse, and paralysis specials in Ultimate, which is fantastic, particularly for rangers, because of certain gear that benefits those statuses. However, we do have a little drawback, which is that we also have a reduction on the effectiveness of Devils and Demons specials, so they will cut enemy HP by less. So for humans, Devils will cut by 50%, where it's 25% on an android, and Demons will cut by 75% on a human, but will cut by 45% on an android. So there is quite a big reduction in the effectiveness of those. However, they are still worth using because they are still reasonably big HP cuts, particularly for enemies that have a lot of HP or really high defense, like Epsilon. Even for dealing with things like pan arms, you can use demons on, just to make them split quicker. So that's a rough idea of the benefits of playing an android. The downsides, obviously, is you've got those cuts to these states, as I mentioned. You also, obviously, as you've got no TP or mental strength, you can't use techniques of any kind, which also means you can't use Rester. So you are fully reliant on using recovery items to heal or having someone heal you. So you're going to be reliant a lot on your Dimates, Trimates, Star Atomizers, and so on. You can also use HP Steel Specials as well, so that's another way of getting around that. So that's the advantages of playing an android anywhere. So the next one we'll look at is we'll look at some basic gear that a RAcast might want to look into, just so you can maximize their effectiveness. And then we'll go into what the advantages and disadvantages of the class are, and where it shines and where you might want to reconsider it. So for the gear, the first thing we'll look at is mag, because mag is generally one of your most important parts of gear. So for RAcast, a mag build I would recommend is something like this. So it's very, very similar to your normal power mag. Now, normally in most videos, I'll recommend that you go with a 5, 145, 50, 0 mag. With RAcast, you can notice we are slightly different. We're at 5, 148, 47, 0. The reason for this is just because when I actually looked this up on the Affinia wiki, using this mag layout with a couple of bits of gear will actually let you max your important stats. Not everything, but it'll let you max the stats that are important. And it's so similar in stats to a normal power mag that I'd probably just go with this anywhere, because you're only losing 1 or 2 accuracy, and you're only gaining a couple of attack power. So I know it's quite strange that we've got 47 dex, but this is apparently the amount you need to max the stats. It's probably because of the power requirement that you need, so you probably need the 148 power to get that, and you just left over with one unused dex stat, which is unfortunate, but it's just the way that the mag layout works. So you can go with this if you want to max important stats. If you want to do this, you want to be using this with a V101 unit and a red ring. And then you just want to focus entirely on power and luck materials. So it'd be 122 power materials and 28 luck materials. And that would help you max everything. Well, everything that's important. Obviously, that does depend on you getting a red ring, so just bear that in mind. If you don't want to faff around with a strange mag layout like this, you can just go with a regular 5, 145, 50, 0, and you'll be absolutely fine. As to photon blasts, usual 3. So we'll go with Estella and Pillar for main damage sources. So Estella for hitting things directly in front of you, Pillar for hitting things around you. And then Myla and Eula should be obvious that because we're an android, we have no access to shifter and D-band. So anywhere we can boost our attack and defense is going to be really, really invaluable for us. So having the ability to cast that level 21 shifter and D-band every so often is going to be a huge, huge damage boost for a RAcast, particularly considering we've got so much attack power anywhere. This is a way of capitalizing on that. Also gives us a nice defense boost as well, so you can't really turn our noses up at it. So I would definitely go with Myla and Eula. I tend to recommend this on most classes anyway, even if you're a Force, because you can use it to chain with other players if they don't have it. But for RAcast, particularly for androids in general, but particularly for the range androids who can't get access to shift and D-band any other way, this is a fantastic way of getting that boost. So what we'll do is we'll just quickly equip that, just so we've got the stat boost from it. So next up, we're looking at some of the other gear. So we'll go with defensive gear first. So first of all, armor. So there are 2 I'd probably recommend for RAcast. So the first one is D-Parts version 101. Now, the reason that you go for this is the stats on it are not fantastic, honestly. They're reasonably okay. You don't need to be very high level to equip it. It's only level 51, so you can even use this at lower level if you want to. Its stats are okay. That's not a huge deal because you're a ranger anyway, so the reality is that you're probably going to avoid a lot of damage anyway, just by virtue of being away from enemies. The main reason that people recommend this for android rangers is because it boosts your attack power. So it gives you a nice little attack power boost, so it's another way of capitalizing on that massive attack power that we have with RAcast. So that's definitely one I would recommend. Also gives us reasonable light and dark resistances as well. So the other one I'd recommend is the Blackhound Cuirass. Now this is a Blue Burst exclusive. Now this is a very, very strange armor. So what this does is it gives you a huge defense boost. It's absolutely massive defense boost. It's one of the highest defense armors in the entire game. I believe, yes, it's only usable by androids. The big downside of this armor, though, is it actually reduces your evade by a lot. So what you can see is it gives us basically a huge defensive boost at the expense of taking away evade. So it's not even that it gives you 0 evade, it actually takes evade off you. Now you can't go below your base evade, but it will still take a huge chunk of that evade off you. Now, for most androids, this isn't going to be very viable armor just because you don't really want to be losing too much evade, because that'll mean you take hits more often when enemies hit you instead of blocking. But for rangers, you can get away with it. Again, because you've got that range advantage and you're staying away from enemies anywhere, quite often just having that massive defensive boost is going to be useful for you. Though if something does manage to hit you, they're not going to do as much damage. The downside is that they probably are going to hit you because you're losing the evade. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword, really. So it's up to you if you want to go with this. If you want to go about all out, reducing the damage that you take, then Blackhound Cuirass is fantastic. But just be aware that you are going to get hit more often if enemies do hit you, because you're not going to have the evade to actually block things. So those are the two I'd probably go with. I'd probably edge towards going with deep arts, just because the attack power boost is really nice. That's one option. Any other endgame armor will do fine though, so anything that's usable by androids. Another one that's not bad is Luminous Field. So Luminous Field is armor. It's available on episode 1 and 2. It has really, really reasonable stats, quite nice defense. The only downside is it does drain your health over time. For androids, that's not really a big deal at all, because you've got the native HP regen standing still anyway, and the HP drain rate on it is really slow anyway. And it also doesn't drain HP when you stood still. So I run a Luminous Field on my Hue Seal on GameCube, and it works absolutely fine. So RAcast would have no problems with it. That's one option. Next up, if we go to barriers and shields. So main one I'd recommend is Ranger Wall. We covered this a bit in the Raymal video, but essentially it's an armor you get from Gallon Shop. You just need to play the mini games in Gallon Shop until you've got about 300 to 310 Gallon points, and then you can exchange for the Ranger Wall. Again, very low level to equip, 41. Main reason we use this is for the accuracy boost, so it gives us a nice 20 accuracy boost, which on RAcast is actually quite appreciated because, as I mentioned before, we are the lowest accuracy of all the rangers. We are still high accuracy because we are a ranger, but having that extra boost from Ranger Wall will be really, really useful for you. So I'd recommend this, and I would honestly probably just run this until you get to a high enough level to use Red Ring, and then change for a Red Ring after that. Another option you can go with RAcast is Gratia. So Gratia is a shield. It's Blue Burst exclusive. And what it does is it gives you a set boost if you use it in conjunction with the Yasminkov weapons. So there's a few different Yasminkov weapons. So you've got the 3000R rifle, 2000H handgun, 7000V rifle, which is the one that looks a bit like a shotgun, the 9000M mech guns. So any of those, you'll get a set boost with Gratia. And Gratia is only usable by androids, so and because it has that Yasminkov boost, it's best suited towards ranger androids. The only thing you need to know about Gratia, though, is that it does actually have a negative penalty if you use it with the Rianov weapons. So if you're going to use any of the Rianov rifles, make sure you're not using Gratia with it, because you'll actually have a deficit applied. But in general, though, I would probably honestly just go with Ranger Wall. You can also go with things like Shields of Delsaber for Dark Resist. Later on, you can swap that out for a Anti-Dark Ring if you want to, for the Dark Resist if you go into an area with a lot of instant kill. But in general, I would just go Ranger Wall until you get to 180 to use Red Ring. Or units. So main ones I'd recommend is, so probably V101 would be the first one. V101, again, is a unit that gives you loads of stat boosts. It also increases your luck as well as that it also gives you a 40% battle speed increase. We cover this in basically every Hunter and Ranger video because it's such a useful unit. If you're playing one of the classic versions, I would just substitute that out for a God Battle instead. But if you're playing Blue Burst, I would probably go with just running the V101. Until you've got that, you could run either a God Battle or a Heavenly Battle. They'll do absolutely fine. But you want to be looking for a V101 really, just for the stat boost as well. You can also use units like V502. So V502 will increase the success rate of different special attacks that you use. Particularly of use are the freeze, confuse, and paralysis specials. So it will help you land the paralysis with weapons like spread needle. It'll help you, land those freeze and confuse specials more often and paralysis ones. It also boosts the effectiveness of instant kill specials as well. So that can be fantastic on Ranger as well if you can get a good weapon that has hell. So for example, like a hell laser or something. They're really, really useful. Honestly, RAcast is quite flexible for units, so after that you can kind of go with whatever you want. As I've said, if you use that mag layout that I mentioned earlier, so this 5148470, you can max your important stats just with a V101 and a red ring. So that then leaves you essentially 3 slots available to play with. So one of them I would definitely fill with a V502 for the increased special effectiveness. The other 2 are kind of flex slots, really. You can choose what to go with. So you could go with some status cure units. So you go with like Cure Freeze, for example. You could run some other units that boost your stats more if you wanted to until you get to the max stats. So it's a very, very flexible class. You can kind of choose what you want to go with. So next up, we've got weapons. So there's a few I'd recommend. So first one is oddly a melee weapon. So Excalibur. So Excalibur is a saber that you get by unsealing the saber Lame d'Argent. So Lame d'Argent, you get it and then you kill 10,000 enemies with it equipped and it'll unseal into Excalibur. Generally, don't unseal it on a RAcast. Androids are really, really terrible at unsealing weapons just because they don't really have the consistent long-term crowd control. They've got the traps, but once your traps are done, that's it. If you're unsealing this, I would recommend doing it with, ideally with a force, but so you can just spam Gifoy. If you haven't got a force, then either a Whirl or a Rare Mal will work as well. And just basically just stand in a quest and just spam Gifoy until you've got 10,000 kills and unsealed it. It's very, very boring, but it's the fastest way of unsealing. So the reason we recommend RAcast is because it has a huge amount of attack power. It hits 3 targets and has a Berserk special. We've obviously got tons and tons of health anyway, so using Berserk isn't really too much of a deal for us. And because we've got so much attack power, we can actually do a ton of damage with this. What you can see is we do have a little bit of an accuracy problem. What you can see there is that even with those little accuracy problems, we can still do nearly 1,000 damage with the Berserk special. And again, just to reiterate, we do get that HP regen here as well, so you can see that in action there. So that's why we go with Excalibur. Now, the main reason that you'd use Excalibur would be mainly for boss fights, to be honest. So taking care of bosses with multiple targets that are close together, Excalibur's fantastic for. In general play, so going through each of the areas, you might not use it as much. You might bust it out against some of the more high HP enemies, but generally it's more of a boss killer. Next up, we've got Cannon Rouge. So we've mentioned this in some of the Ranger videos already, but Cannon Rouge is a Blue Burst exclusive, as is Excalibur actually. And it's a bazooka. Now it can't combo, but what this is used for, again, this is mainly a boss killer. So you use this against bosses that have a lot of targets. So things like the Dragon, Dural Lair, bosses like that have a lot of targets clustered together. The bazooka will hit all of them every shot. And Cannon Rouge has one of the highest attack powers of any bazooka, if not the highest. So it makes sense to go with this. So this is a fantastic weapon for taking care of bosses. Next up, we have the 2 sort of staple Ranger weapons, if you like. So Frozen Shooter. So Frozen Shooter is a rifle, and its special attack is a freeze beam that instantly freezes enemies. So if I go in here, you can see how reliable that is for taking care of enemies and freezing them. So the main use for this is just to lock down individual enemies. It's more or less a staple range weapon, and I'll recommend this in every range video that I do. It's not a particularly hard weapon to get. It drops from Hildator for a few IDs. I think you can also get it from Black Paper's Deal in episode 4 as well, but it's mainly a Hildator drop. It's just fantastic crowd control, just for dealing with... This is mainly for taking care of single targets, but if you want to take care of multiple targets that are close together, you can also upgrade it into a Snow Queen. Snow Queen, I mentioned this in the Raymal video, but it's basically a frozen shooter that can't combo, so you can fire one shot at a time. But while frozen shooter can only freeze one target with its free shot, Snow Queen can actually freeze a small cluster of enemies. It has a kind of splash damage with its special, so when you use it, if there's enemies really, really close together, they'll actually both get frozen. In most situations, you're probably just going to go for the frozen shooter overall. But the Snow Queen is a nice option if you want to go with that. The way you get the Snow Queen, if you don't know how, is you get a frozen shooter, and then you go to the Gallon shop quest, and you want to go to Paganini's photon drop shop, and you want to exchange for an item called a photon booster. And then you basically just grind the frozen shooter to 9, and then just use the photon booster on the frozen shooter, and it'll turn it into a Snow Queen. And the Snow Queen will have the percentages of whatever the frozen shooter was. You probably want to try and get a frozen shooter with hit to make a Snow Queen, just because you only have one shot. You can't combo. You need as much accuracy as you can to try and land that special shot. So next up we have the second of the sort of staple ranger weapons, which is the Spread Needle. The Spread Needle is it's a rifle, but it shoots like a shotgun, just with a faster firing animation. It is very, very short range, and it's not particularly strong, but the main reason you use this is for the special attack. So Spread Needle has unreduced Cs, which is paralysis. You can see straight away they will paralyze that Vulma. So we'll let him break out. He's paralyzed again. So you can see how reliable Spread Needle is, particularly on an Android Ranger. Obviously, we've got that boost to paralysis specials being an Android, so Spread Needle is absolutely fantastic. Again, if you use something like V502, it's going to be even easier to land it as well. This is your main weapon for taking care of crowds in terms of running through different areas. So as you run through an area, if things are able to be paralyzed, you just want to generally be using Spread Needle and just locking all the spawns down for the players. For solo, the paralysis just helps you to lock down enemies so that you can reposition if you need to as well. But yeah, absolutely fantastic weapon. Next up, we have Heaven Striker. So Heaven Striker is a Blue Burst exclusive. It's a handgun, and it's the strongest handgun in the game. Now, Heaven Striker is an interesting weapon, so its special attack as standard is Berserk. You can see it does a ton of damage. With Heaven Striker, you can actually change the special attack as well. So if you use a mag called Striker Unit, if the internet beat time starts with an even number, so the beat time is, you won't see it at the moment because of my camera, but in the bottom right of the screen when you open your menu, there is a little counter that says internet time. And if the first digit of that internet time is an even number, and you've got a Striker Unit mag equipped, then the Heaven Striker special attack will change to Divine Punishment, which is where it fires like light beams from the sky. This will do less damage on RAcast than on the human rangers, just because the damage is influenced a bit by mental strength as well, which obviously we don't have any of. But it's still really, really good for locking down enemies because it does flinch enemies when it hits them. But without the Striker Unit, you'll always have Berserk special. And even without the Striker Unit, the Berserk special on this is really, really useful. It also does have an element of auto-aim as well, so I don't know if I can show that. I might be able to here, actually. You see, I'm not actually aiming at those boxes there. If I use the special attack, though, you can see he kind of pivots towards it. So again, if I position myself here, you can see we don't pivot there with a normal attack, but as soon as I do a special, you can see it's actually really strange. So even though I'm facing this way, the bullet actually has a bit of a cone arc to it. That's one of the weird perks of Heaven Striker. The special actually has a bit of an arc to it. So that's that. Next up, we have the Yasminkov 9000M. So this, again, will get the boost from Gratia if you use it with that. Now, these are... So Mech Guns are obviously really, really strong weapons, particularly late game. Because although they don't have much attack power, they hit really fast quite a lot of times. And even without a massive amount of character attack power, you can get really good mileage out of Mech Guns. Now, in late game, there's a few you can use. So you could go with... If you want to go easy, you can go with Charge Vulcans from the shop. Just get 50 hit Charge Vulcans. They will do absolutely fine. They are absolutely brilliant weapons. You can also go with something like an MA60 Vice with hit. which is it's a pretty common rare weapon, but it has a berserk special. So if you can get one of those with hit, that'll do fantastic. Yasmin of 9000 is another option. So the Yas 9K, the main benefit of this is it actually has rifle range. You can see we took care of those boxes from here, which you wouldn't be able to do with normal mech guns. So these are a really, really strong weapon as well. And typically on episode 1 and 2 in particular, your typical loadout for a ranger is going to be spread needle, frozen shooter, Yasmin of 9000. Next, there's the Baron's launcher, the most confusingly named weapon in the game. So confusing because it's called a Baron's launcher. It's made from parts of Barons, so you need the enemy parts unlock available to make this. You get the parts of Barons and then you convert them into the Baron's launcher. It's confusing because it doesn't look like a Baron's, it looks like a Garan's instead. And according to the Affinia wiki, I didn't realize this, but apparently there is a file in the game files for a recolored version of this that looks like a Baron's, but for some reason Sega decided not to use it and still call it a Baron's launcher. No idea why that is. So Baron's launcher is an interesting weapon. So it's a shot weapon. You see it fires a few missiles. Now, compared to a normal shot, there's a few differences with this. So shots normally fire 5 projectiles. Baron's launcher only fires 4. And the projectiles also fire a lot slower than a normal shot as well, which means very fast enemies might actually be able to walk out the way of the projectiles. The main reason to use this is because it's one of the highest attack power shots in the game, and it also has a charge special. So again, this is just straight up damage. Yeah, so the main reason to use the Baron's launcher is because it has really, really high attack power, and it also has a charge special as well. So charge is the special where you use money to do more damage than normal. This makes it a fantastic thing for taking care of big spawns of enemies, because you can take care of 4 enemies at once with tons and tons of damage. The downsides are that obviously the projectiles do move slower, and you are only hitting 4 instead of 5 with a normal shot. So just bear that in mind, but it probably is still worth using. It is still a really, really good weapon. Now, one disadvantage of the Baron's launcher is that on episode 1 and 2, you can't get one with hit, because you can't add hit to body part weapons. In Affinia, there is a way of doing it, but it requires photon crystals to do it. I think you do it in Claire's deal, as far as I know. So there is a way of adding hit to that if you want to later. So Baron's launcher, I think, is still a weapon that's definitely worth considering. Next up, let's talk about S-rank weapons. So S-rank weapons are obtained by getting an S-rank in challenge mode. And the advantage of S-rank weapons is that they allow you to add a special attack of your choosing to them. So there's a couple of options I'd probably recommend for RAcast. So first one will be Needle, which you get from episode 2 challenge mode. So needles, it looks like the spread needle. It shoots in the same way. Now, specials I would recommend for this is you could go with straight up damage. So for RAcast, that would be typically Berserk, because obviously you can't use Spirit because you've got no TP. So you could go with the Berserk Needle if you wanted to. Another option would be you could go with the Demon's Needle if you wanted to. Now, yes, the Demons will be reduced effectiveness because you're an android, but it's still going to reduce enemy HP by quite a bit. You could, if you wanted to, go with an Arrest Needle, which is Paralysis. Now, you might think, what's the point in that when you've got Spread Needle? But Arrest is the next tier up of Paralysis from Spread Needle. So if you want to get essentially a Spread Needle that can paralyze better, then an Arrest Needle might be an option to go with. Downside is you can't add hit to S-rank weapons. So just bear that in mind, that you might have some issues landing the accuracy. Again, if you're using something like a V502, that will help. But it's kind of up to you if you want to go with a Spread Needle or go for an Arrest Needle. You could also go with something like a Hell Needle as well, which is instant kill. So again, V502 is going to boost that as well. Another option is, this is actually a really, really useful one. So, and I think a lot of people actually sleep on this. So, an S-rank rifle. You could go with a handgun as well, but I'd probably go for a rifle just for the range. Now, the reason I recommend the S-rank rifle for RAcast is because, as we've discussed, there's no way of a RAcast getting Shifter and D-Band. And similarly, there is also no real way of them getting Gel and Zalur either. Which means that certain enemies can be quite awkward to take care of. One in particular is in the control tower. The Del Lilies and the Ilgils actually have really, really high defense and can be a little bit awkward for androids to take care of sometimes because they've got no way of buffing their own attack or lowering the enemy's defense. So what you can do is you can get something like an S-rank rifle and add a Zalur special to it. So, for example, if I shoot this Volma, you can see the Zalur shot does no damage at all, but you can see it has actually applied Zalur. So what I'll do is I'll show you the difference. So I just kill this. This Volma, if we shoot it with a normal attack first, do 112. If I then Zalur it and then hit again, do 149. So it's quite a big difference in attack power in damage that you get from applying the Zalur. This is fantastic for control tower because with the rifle range, it means that on the floors where there's a gap in the middle, you can actually shoot across the gap and hit things on the other side generally. And you can just apply Zalur from the other side of the room. So this is a really, really useful weapon. It is very situational, but it will help you out in areas where it is useful. So that's something I'd probably recommend as well. And this is got from episode 1 challenge mode. So those are the main weapons I'd probably look at. Those are the ones I'd probably recommend for a RAcast. So with that said, where does RAcast shine? So obviously RAcast is a very, very tanky class because we've got so much health and attack power. We are quite hard to kill just because we are so tanky. We've obviously got the Android boost as well, so we're very, very good at crowd control. The combination of the traps as well as the boost to freeze, confuse, and paralysis makes RAcast an absolutely fantastic support class for keeping things completely locked down. I do find that it does struggle a little bit solo. So because you don't have any access to shifter and D-band, some enemies can be a little bit more awkward to take care of solo. So it's kind of a strange class, I find, because I feel like it does struggle in some areas solo. Some areas it's absolutely fine, but there's a couple of areas in the game where it does kind of struggle a bit solo. But in a party, RAcast is almost unstoppable, because having a RAcast that's got shifter and D-band applied to it from a force is just an absolute killer machine. Like, they do unbelievable damage. So I would typically describe RAcast as, in a party play, it's mainly there to lock down spawns and then just pick them off when they're locked down. It can also function as kind of a backup hunter as well. Just because you've got so much attack power, you can just, on a boss, for example, pull out something like Excalibur and just go to town on the boss, and you'll actually out-damage a lot of the hunters. So I mentioned earlier that we do have more attack power than Hunuel and Hukasil, so you will be hitting harder than those and more accurate than those as well. So just bear that in mind. So you can use RAcast in that role if you want to. So on a boss, if there is no hunter, you can just pull out a melee weapon like Excalibur and just act as a backup hunter if you want to. So there is a bit of flexibility with the class. So that's kind of where I see RAcast overall. So last thing I want to cover before I show the boss fight is I just want to go over some recommended section IDs for a RAcast. So as you know, section IDs have a profound impact on the game, so they completely influence what your drop charts are. So taking that into consideration when you're making your character is going to have a big impact on what you can find and what you can hunt for other characters as well. So first thing we'll look at is IDs that you might want as a RAcast. So if you want to find items that RAcast can use well, you can consider IDs like Greenhill. So Greenhill gets a lot of rifle drops. It also is very, very good for finding things like the Heaven Striker. You can find things like Cannon Rouge, V502. So there is a lot of very useful range drops on that ID. You could also go with something like Purple Num as well. So Purple Num again is a really, really strong ranger focused ID, which gets a lot of mech guns. So things like Yasminkov 9000M, they're Purple Num drop. So those are the two I'd probably recommend if you want to find things specifically for your RAcast. Quite often in PSO though, what you'll do is you'll actually make a character to hunt things for other characters. So just as an example, at the moment I've got a Red Rear Force who is hunting a Kasami Bracer for my hunter. Now my Force is not going to use Kasami, but Red Rear is really, really useful for finding that drop. And Force is quite a good class for hunting the drop, so I basically made her to hunt that drop for my hunter. So that's what you can do in PSO as well. In that vein, what I would recommend is if you're wanting to use a RAcast to hunt or another class, and you could go with either Skylight, Bluefull, or Whitehill. So Skylight obviously has a lot of very, very coveted hunter drops. It also has some reasonable range drops as well. Generally a very, very strong ID for weapons. So the problem with Skylight though is that a lot of its drops, particularly things like the Sealed J Sword, are in really horrible areas for a hunter. So control tower is horrible to run with a hunter. So quite often what you'll do is you'll make a Skyline Ranger to use, you know, Frozen Shooter and Spread Needle and so on in tower to make it a lot easier. And you'll hunt those drops for your hunter on a Ranger class. You can also go with something like Bluefull. So Bluefull, again, gets some very, very strong hunter weapons. So things like Yunchang, Zanba. Very, very good for those. It's also one of the best IDs for hunting things like Limiter. So another ID is the one we're actually using here, which is White Hilt. So White Hilt is a really, really strong general use ID. It's just got a really, really strong ID across the board. So those are ones I'd probably recommend. So I'd say Green Nil or Purple Num for stuff that you want to use for your RAcast. Or you can go with Skylight Bluefull or White Hilt if you want something that you can actually for other characters. Red Rear is also a really reasonable ID as well. That's again quite a balanced ID, as is Yellow Bows. So either of those are probably decent recommendations. Now, what I'll do now is I'll show you a quick example of a boss fight, just so you can see an example of how you could use a RAcast. Yeah, so we'll go against Dalrelly just so you can see how the Cannon Rouge works. You can see the amount of damage that we're doing here. So you can see more or less every shot we're doing about 460 damage to every single part of Dalrelly. The only downside with this weapon is the fact that it can't combo. So he's going to put mines down, so we want to switch to another weapon. So we just use something like mechs just to clear the ones near us. You could also use a needle or something there as well. Now there we want to change our positioning because we're not hitting as many targets as we could. So we probably want to go here just to try and get as many as we can. You can use other options as well, so you could also use something like a needle or a shot weapon. Yeah, generally if you stand in that corner for that attack, he'll usually miss with it. There we go, that's Dalrelly done. So we probably could have done that a little bit faster if we'd been in a better position for when he first jumped on the raft, but that's just an idea of how you can use weapons like Cannon Rouge just to hit multiple targets on a boss. You could also go, for example, with, if you want to use something like a Spread Needle or one of your S-Rank Needles, they would have hit a few targets as well, and the advantage of those would be that you'd be able to combo with those as well. Generally, for something like the Cannon Rouge, you want to be focusing on bosses that have a lot of cramped together targets. So for Dalrelly, he has all these different segments that are all targetable, so it works quite well for him. Main one I would use it on though is the dragon. So the dragon gets absolutely wasted by bazookas, so I would definitely go with that. But I hope it's been relatively useful. We are going to do one of these class guides for every single class in PSO, so we've actually done a lot of them already, so just check the channel and see if your favourite class is on there already. If not, it will be coming soon. We are going to do one a week for the next few weeks. The next one will be a Force class, because we tend to go Hunter Ranger Force for these videos. If you enjoyed the video, please consider liking or subscribing to the channel. We've also recently opened channel memberships as well, so feel free to join that if you're interested. We also do live streams once a week on YouTube, usually on Sundays, where we play PSO or NGS, and we've been playing a bit of PSU recently as well. Apart from that, you can also follow me on Twitter or X at Section Skylight, and I tend to post on there whenever I'm doing a video or whenever I'm going live, so feel free to follow me there as well. Any questions, just leave them in the comments below. I will try and answer what I can, but I hope that's been relatively useful, and I'll see you guys in the next one.